All right, I'd like to call the September 9th meeting of the Hartford Charter Revision Commission to order at 7 p.m. And we will start with the roll call. When I call your name, please indicate whether or not you're present. James Wolf is here and present. Raul De Jesus Jr.
Present.
John Gale.
Present.
Alexander Aponte.
Here.
Aruna Naralampulam. Steve Bonafonte.
Present.
Vicky Gallen Clark.
Present.
Maura Harrington. Ken Kennedy. Kathleen Kowalishin.
Here.
Melvin Medina.
Present.
Yadira Rivera.
Present.
Bruce Rubenstein.
Present.
Ian Smith. Okay, we have a quorum. Right now, I will open things up for comment, public comment, with item number 2 on the agenda, and seeing no members of the public present, we will move on to the approval of the minutes from August 19th, 2021. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
There was a motion
Seconded.
by Commissioner De Jesus and seconded by Commissioner Kennedy, whose attendance is so noted. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. All right. I just have a little bit of housekeeping before we get started with item number 4. So with regards to the conversation tonight, for commissioners, if you all wish to be recognized to speak, I'd ask that you use the raised hand function or physically raise your hand, and I will recognize you to the best of my ability in the order that you raised your hand. And if you'd like to ask another commissioner a question, you can direct that question through the chair to that commissioner. And once you're done with the question, I will recognize the individual you've directed the question to and provide them an opportunity to respond. I don't think in person that we'd have to get this formal under normal circumstances, but since we're virtual and we're going to be, discussing some contentious issues, I think this is the best way to maintain decorum and keep the proceedings respectful. And then with regards to, well, first of all, any questions with regards to that and how we manage the conversation? Okay. And then moving on to tonight's proceedings, when it comes to what we're doing tonight, as a body, we're going to be directing Attorney Mednick as to how to proceed with drafting the areas he's highlighted in the document that he sent over to everyone earlier today. To the extent that we can, I'd like to reach a consensus on these issues and then direct Attorney Mednick to draft accordingly. If there are areas of disagreement, we'll have Attorney Mednick flag those and include some of the possible options for action in a second draft of the document, which will circulate to everyone before our next meeting, so everyone will have enough time to digest things, once they see a fully drafted section or chapter rather. And then at our next meeting, we'll have some final discussions on the draft that he circulated before voting on a motion or a set of motions to approve recommendations to changes to Chapter 10 of the Charter. Does that make sense to everyone?
It does.
Okay, great. And then to be clear to everyone, at the end of this charter revision process, we'll put together a draft. There'll be a public hearing. Then we'll vote on a final draft to send over to council for their consideration. So a vote next week to make recommendations doesn't mean it's set in stone and that's the end of it. Obviously, we'll need to move on to other sections, but we'll continue to hear from the public and from other stakeholders throughout this process. And if something needs to be tweaked at some point down the road, or if there's new information or change in circumstances, we can revisit certain things. So your hands aren't, bound with a vote next week or at any point before we make our final recommendations to the council. Okay? All right. Attorney Bendick, I will give you the floor and we can start walking through this document that you have prepared for us. So thank you very much for putting it together.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone. And what I want to do is first describe what it is I did here. I tried to simply reorganize the current provision without making any significant or substantive changes. That's your job. But as we go through the document, I have a series of placeholders that I've put in there for consideration, and some issues that have been raised by the chair and by other members of the commission in this process. So as I go through, I'll try to explain what it is that I think should be here. What I really have attempted to do was create kind of a linear process in the charter. So when you go through this section, you will be able to go from the beginning of the budget process to the end of the process. The only real substantive thing I did was not change anything, but I took the mayor's veto authority, which is currently in the city council chapter, and I moved it into this chapter so that you don't have to go back and forth looking for the process. So that's kind of a simple editorial thing. At some point when we get into the city council section, if we approve this, you'll note that that section will be gone. It'll have an internal reference to the budget section. So we open up the budget process with kind of introductory provisions. One is I will recommend that we have, I think the city of New Britain had some really good, and some other, I think Stamford did as well, some really good introductory language on how the budget system works. What is the budget system? What does it mean? It won't be a massive substantive issue, but it gives the members of the public a sense of what it is they're going to be looking at as they go through the budget section. And so I recommend that we come up with a few declarative sentences, which I would be happy to draft if everybody is comfortable with it, that kind of describes what the budget system is and how it works. The second provision is more of a inside politics provision. It's a cooperation. It's cooperation language. I've developed these provisions in several charters where we make it clear at the beginning of the process that all the players have responsibilities, but the principal responsibility is to cooperate with each other. It gives the Common Council leverage with the executive branch and vice versa through this process to have a charter provision that says not only do you have to do this, but you need to play fairly in the playground to make sure that you get the job done. And so I've developed some language there that really is language that is kind of advisory, but at the same time, it's mandatory language. It's not advisory. It's really mandatory language that is dressed up in a constitutional suit so that you can leverage each other with the language to make sure that employees from the mayor on down cooperate with the Common Council. The fiscal year language was taken from another provision in the charter, and I moved it into the beginning of the budget process to simply describe the fiscal year. And subparagraph D was further down in the chapter. I thought that it was important to establish right at the beginning that the budget is a public record and should be open for public inspection. So that was really a function of moving a document. There is a provision that we're going to discuss later on in the proceedings that the vice chair has raised regarding online access to financial reports and documents. And frankly, if we agree that that should go in, this may not be a bad place for it to be. If we're dealing with public inspection, it would seem to me that the vice chair's concept would have a home somewhere in sub paragraph D of section 1. E is current language. I highlighted it because it right now basically says that we should create a budget ordinance and establish dates in that ordinance. If we in fact have fixed dates set forth in the charter, then we may have a simple admonition that you can supplement this charter provision with ordinances. But if we set the dates, we don't need to make a reference there. So that will really depend on what we do in this section. The chair has raised a question, going back to D for a second, that we should be posting this on the website at the same time that it's submitted to the council, and I think that that's correct. I do have language I think I placed in here somewhere that when you do post these documents in the town clerk's office, they should be posted on the website. We probably should find other hard places, library branches and things like that, where you can post the budget. Are there any questions on those preliminary sections?
Nope.
Thank you. If Bruce doesn't have any questions, and I think we can move on. We'll go to section 2, which is the annual departmental estimates. This 2A is current language, which I did not change. That kind of summarizes and provides the mayor with the authority to require the departments to provide the estimates, and then B is requiring the submission of the estimates at a time the mayor shall determine. So I guess one of the first questions that you have to decide is, it's an internal executive branch issue. Do we lock in a date by which the mayor should have these items submitted? Or in this case, do we leave it at the mayor's discretion, knowing, of course, that at some point he's going to have to submit by a date certain the document to the council? Is this an area? So it's kind of the first decision point that we need to think about, is whether we leave it up to the mayor to make a decision on how he or she manages the administration and the preliminary estimates, or do we lock in a date by which the mayor has to request this information? So that would be an open question to the commission to think about. I don't know if you want to talk about it now, Mr. Chair, or whether I should.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, one thing to think about is if we are, I think I don't want to speak for everyone here. We're going to come to it later, but if there is kind of this general consensus that we're going to be moving the date that the mayor must submit the budget to the council forward, I would imagine that giving the mayor some time or the ability to figure out how he's going to, direct his departments to get them the estimates, and kind of leaving that up to the mayor makes sense. But happy to hear what other folks think with additional experience. Commissioner Kennedy.
Mr. Chairman?
I think giving the mayor should determine this. It's more of an executive function. The mayor, anyone who's doing a budget, they start that process in November. The mayor determines that. The mayor can determine when he wants his final numbers in, preliminary or otherwise. My only concern is when the mayor submits the budget to the public.
Okay, I heard Commissioner Rubenstein next, and then we're going to Commissioner Gallen-Clark. Commissioner Rubenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Commissioner Kennedy. I think we should allow maximum flexibility to the executive branch, and the most flexible way to do this is to insert the language that as such date as the mayor shall determine.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein. Commissioner Gallen-Clark.
Thank you, Chair Wolf. I also heard from the last meeting some of the best practices and Stanford and other areas. And I did remember talking to TJ Clark, Councilman TJ Clark, and Councilwoman Shirley Surgeon about the rush that's in this process. So I'm hoping that we will consider some kind of date or some type of time frame. So I just wanted to keep that in mind. And I actually am looking at the budget estimates that Attorney Metnick included at the bottom for the various cities.
Yeah, so those, Steve, do you want to explain this or do you want me to?
I'll be happy to. So again, Commissioner Gallon Clark, this is for the the submission to the mayor of estimates by the departments. The mayor administers. I am going to recommend strongly that we come in with firm fixed dates for the submission to the council and all dates once the council has the document. This one, I don't have a strong feelings about. The mayor has a job to get something done by a date certain, where that has to go constitutionally to the council. Then the mayor had better figure out how best to assemble those estimates so that he or she can prepare a budget. And so that's why I put all the dates in here, but you'll see some of them either don't have a date or dates are determined by the mayor in some cases. Some are very late. I was surprised by some of them. But I would expect a lot of this stuff should be done, as Commissioner Kennedy indicated, in November, December, and by January, the mayor should be formulating a budget. But it's really up to you. But I do believe that the date that the mayor submits the budget needs to be a firm date.
And that's something that would actually be, we're going to be looking at.
We'll address it a couple sections down.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. All right. So is there a general view that on this one you leave it to the discretion of the mayor?
Yes.
All right. Okay. The other question on the content of the budgetary requests and estimates, later on you'll see that there will or should be a fairly detailed delineation of the contents of the budget for the council and those things that should be submitted to the council. There are charters that really spell out what should be in the budget estimates. It kind of mirrors what should go to the council. And so we can address it in one of two ways. We could either have a specific list or make a reference to contents of the budget proposal to the council. And so, and as at the present time, we do not have I think we have an ordinance that deals with capital projects, but actually there's not a lot of data in the capital project, as we'll discuss in a few minutes. So the real question is, do we want to have specific contents delineated for the budget estimates that are really driven by the charter?
Commissioner DeHazes?
Yeah, I strongly agree that it should be delineated. And the reason why I see this is that for continuance of government, right? Meaning that if a councilman who is now looking at this meeting or potential candidate can continue and be familiar with that format that the budget is done. I think keeping a budget looking a certain way, and I think the public will recognize it, understand it, and know what to expect from it. And I think that is a direction in moving the budget process to be a little bit more friendlier. And I think the content may relate to a certain format so that people can be familiar with it. And I think that is super important in order for us to engage the public and for future leaders to understand, because every mayor in some way, somehow, if you go back at the budget, has changed it or tweaked it to their own liking. The problem with that is that there's no consistency in how to read things. So certain things get moved around. And I guess there should be some discretion, but I think we need to think about the public and the elected officials that are coming in their first year or second year so that they can understand that this is a familiar document to them. I think that for me is important to remain consistent in the way that the format looks like.
Any other comments? Councilman Gale?
Yeah, I just, Steve, this through your chair to the Steve. Are we talking about subsection C here?
That is correct.
Yeah, okay, so this subsection deals with what were proposals for what you're asking departments to provide to the administration. This to count to Commissioner DeJesus's comment. This is not what we're asking be provided to the public at this point. This section deals with what you're saying needs to be provided to the administration in terms of coming up with budgetary requests. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct. And so the question, it's almost the same question with regard to setting the date. Presumably, as you'll see a little later, we do have very specific requirements, even in the current charter, for content that has to be in when you receive the budget. So again, the mayor in all probability is going to be asking for information that will give him or her the ability to meet those requirements of the charter. So as I said, some charters list the things that should be in the budget estimate, and others do not. But and so the real question is, I don't want to do a duplicate list, but there may be content that you think about that should be in those estimates that may not ultimately be in the budget, and they're public documents ultimately. I think those.
Yeah. I mean, I would defer until we get to that point, because I think the more important thing is what is the content that's going to be given by the mayor to the public and to the council.
Okay. Does Commissioner DeJesus still have a question, or is his hand?
Commissioner DeJesus, yes.
I think that was up from the earlier.
I see that, just to, some consistency, and I think, yes, it is for the administration at that point. The problem is that we want this to be a uniform process, and we found it to be very difficult. The finance department thinking that they have to do two tasks. We just want to make them aware that we want the same document as presented to the mayor that the public can see. Just it needs some uniformity. So I think, yes, I agree with Councilman Gale that it is for the administration at the beginning, but then it becomes a public document. And I think it's just, if everyone is looking at the same document at a certain format, it's a lot easier. It's like an assembly line. Just being able for everyone to look at it and be very familiar with it. And I think once people are familiar with that document, it becomes less intimidating. I think that is the general purpose, I think, of a budget. As intimidating as it is, the more familiar the process look or the setup looks, I think the less intimidating it becomes. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking in my head to make it easier. I think that's the anxiety I had when I was a council member, is just making sure that things, especially nowadays, we're getting advice from, or we're on a phone, we're looking at the same section. We can only say verbatim, hey, look at section D, and everybody knows how to find it. And I think that's important.
Commissioner Kennedy?
The one thing I had concerns with, and it's just in terms of more transparency for the public, in terms of what needs to be required in the budget, and I'm interested in anyone's thoughts on this, is we get recovery dollars from the police department all the time. Those dollars are off budget. They're never included in a budget. And the police department is resistant to putting those numbers in a budget. When I served, Council President Wooden was very interested in getting those numbers actually to be public information. And the police department just wouldn't move on it. I mean, so if we're talking about documents that need to be estimated, I'd like to find out what the estimates are for the recoveries, and what happens with the recovery dollars. They're never disclosed to the public. I'm not sure this is the appropriate place for it, but we're talking about things you'd like to see in a budget estimate. I'd like to have that required.
when we move to that section, you'll see that I have a category called special revenues, which would include those types of revenues. Was there a legal basis that the department cited, Commissioner?
No. No. They just flat out refused to provide that information. It generally came up on during travel. Police department was still traveling when we had travel bans at that point in time. They stated where that money was coming from, which was the seizure money. The council president at the time then requested that money become more publicly available, that we knew what was going on with the budget. The police department just quite simply, frankly, refused.
Did you ever talk to the mayor at the time?
Oh yeah, the mayor was yeah, the mayor supported his police chief.
Right.
I mean, to me, it was just an odd thing that it was never public information. And if you go back and look at all the budgets now, it's still not.
Yeah, unless there's a statute that somehow segregates it out, I don't think there is one.
No, there isn't. I'm just saying we can certainly require that in terms of, I mean, this is money they recover from. And that's just one of the things, just in terms of transparency, so the public can actually see it.
Right.
And the council.
Again, that's the budget, which we'll talk about in a minute. With regard to the estimates, and I think Commissioner Medina has a question, I'll come up with some generalized language on the estimates to make sure that the estimates include all those items that should be in the budget. Obviously, that goes without saying, but I'm not getting a sense that there's anything that would be unique to the estimate process that we wouldn't want to have in the budget itself. Is there anything that you think a mayor should, Commissioner Kennedy, your experience as chair of the committee, is there anything you think that would be helpful to the mayor that may not be in a line item of the budget, but that would be helpful in making determinations about prepping a budget? Should he have a deeper look to see, should the departments provide them with 5 years of data to see what kind of trend lines there are? Those are the kinds of things I'm getting at, but and I don't know how, anybody have any thoughts on that?
Let's recognize Commissioner Medina first, and then we'll go to Commissioner DeJesus.
Through the chair, one comment, I think, in addition to recovery money, I think Justice Brian grants is another form of funding that comes to OPM, and then OPM distributes to municipalities that often is not included in the annual budget. So those are dollars that are used for staffing, surveillance, and other types of policing activities.
What are those funds called, Commissioner?
Justice Brian grants. They're from the Department of Justice. I can, by email, send you the types of grants that they are. But those are, that would be in the category of special revenue. And, you know, I just think policing being a very unique institution, both in terms of power and responsibilities, but also in a backdrop of a lot of controversy, probably requires both, I would argue, in the estimate and in the annual budget, a more detailed narrative component to the specialized grant, so that they're describing what they're intending to use that money for, that you don't pick that up in a line item budget. That's often some of the challenges. My only, so that was one comment. I guess I have a question related to the estimate component of it, and that's for Attorney Mednick, if there's any value in a public reporting component to that, in the same way that we would be having it for when the budget is finalized for the mayor's offices and transferred to the council. Should there be any open record protections there that we're saying, if the public would like access to these documents, they're available for them?
It'd be a curious question as to whether, I believe it's probably it's foilable data, it's public information. Whether we should establish a standard that the estimates, I think we've established that the budget is a public document. I assume we could expand that to make sure that the estimates are included in the overall definition of budgetary documents if they're submitted. There shouldn't be anything that would fall within an exemption under FOI in budget prep, unless you're preparing for some kind of settlement of a lawsuit. And if that's the case, then it should be so noted, and then that would not have to be disclosed under FOIA. So that's the way to deal with it, Commissioner Medina, is just to make sure that all documents prepared in this process are covered.
Commissioner Kennedy?
In terms of estimates, the city goes back about 5 years, Council, but they don't have any forward projections, which I always find to be interesting. We should probably require some forward projections. I know they have that information. It just generally doesn't make it into the budget as to what each department sees as its future in terms of expenditures. That's just not included in the book. It's generally just basically the forecast for the current year and those that happened in the past.
All right. Anyone else?
Commissioner DeJesus?
No.
Okay, so, and then when it comes to the, my concern, I'm just running in my head with the estimates. My concern is now that we're moving up the date, or we're moving in that direction, I do see how important they'll become. Right now, they may not seem that important to be specified, but I think due to the fact that they're used to having another 2 or 3 months of cushion, they may be a little bit more resistant to provide as much details, because I think the numbers won't be finalized because they're not used to this type of system. So I really do think that we do need to specify what's in the estimates, so that we, as the public and council can follow the estimates from its birth to its end. And I think that is important so that council can see it through and kind of, check what the mayor is looking at and kind of understand what he's seeing. I think that's a big issue with council. The mayor has a lot more data, a lot more information than the council does, and he actually gets to digest it he has a little bit more time to digest that information. Council does not. So again, having that same format and being able to speak the same language that the mayor is seeing, right? Seeing the document, saying, listen, Mayor, section 2-23, it says this estimate. He'll know what you're talking about. And I think it makes the conversation that much more easier. So I think it's just making it, again, I think I'm repeating myself, but I think it's important that we keep a standard format that we can all be familiar with, that the mayor knows about it, that council knows about it. And actually, we've had an issue where the council president had to pick up the mayorship. And it'll be a great way that someone who's on council making that transition to the executive branch, it won't be foreign to them. It'll be a smoother process. So I think with the estimates to the budget, it all should be looked at as one.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Does anybody have any knowledge of how the capital program is currently formulated before it comes to the council? Other cities have very elaborate processes. If you looked at Stanford, or you remember the presentation Michael Pollard made, the city plan commission plays a big role. There's a real major role for city plan. Do we have any idea how it's done in Hartford?
I can tell you what happens at council.
But prior to the council, I know how. I'm assuming I know how it would what would happen in the legislative body. But do we know how it's formulated in any way, shape, or form?
It's just the mayor determines it.
Okay. You'll see when we get to the capital budget that I have a lot of ideas about should be in the capital budget. You guys can then make informed judgments and decisions. So I think I have a feel for where we are on the contents of budgetary requests. The next section, again, another decision point. This is the submission. This is where we submit, the mayor submits the budget. And it's on a date specified by ordinance. Right now, it's the third Monday in April, according to the ordinance. Somebody had suggested that we move it up almost a month, it would be around a month. If you made the submission of the budget concurrent with the mayor's report on the state and condition of the city, which the mayor has to give under Chapter 5, Section 2I, at the first meeting in March. And if you take a look, New Haven has a March 1st submission date. I think that's the earliest of the submission dates. Don't look at Norwalk is odd. Norwalk has the second Tuesday in February. But if you've looked at my data, you're going to see something called the Board of Estimate. If you looked at that 70 pages of stuff that I sent you, they have one of the most Byzantine budget systems I've ever seen. New York got rid of the Board of Estimate 25 or 30 years ago, but Norwalk has kept the Board of Estimate. And all the council does is the council sets the upper limit of the budget. The Board of Estimate handles the budget. So it's a totally alien system. So the question I have is, does the state of the city date look like the right date? It's the date the mayor's talking about where the city's going, where the city's been, and where the city's going. So I wanted to raise that as the first question.
Commissioner Kennedy.
I think it's the appropriate date. The mayor makes several claims in a State of the City address. It's usually a rah-rah session. The mayor lays out several ideas he has for the next year going forward. Submission of the budget at that time seems to make sense. We give the public also a lot more time to review and digest the document, which I think is the most important thing.
You're picking up a month, basically, at the beginning of the process.
Yeah, right now the public has a week. It comes out at the end of April. I mean, public hearings held the very next week, and they're given one night to comment on the budget, and then it goes right to council for their budget process. The public deserves more time to digest and respond to the document. It is all, it's their government. It is the people's government. They need more time to look at it, in my opinion.
You'll see that I'm proposing in here that you have two mandatory public hearings. One is currently covered by the charter 7 days after submission, and the other is would be new. That would come just before final action by the council. So the public gets two major bites at the apple before the council starts considering, and at the end of their consideration to see the preliminary amendments and whatever it is you're going to be offering at that process. But we'll get to that in a minute. So is there a consensus that the mayor's state of the city, which would be the first meeting in March, would be the right date for the budget submission?
I just want to recognize
Yes.
Mr. Alan Clark first before we come to
Mr. Chairman?
hold on, Commissioner Rubenstein. We're going to go to Commissioner Gallon Clark and then come to you.
Yeah. I believe that Attorney Metnick answered my question because I wasn't clear on what he was proposing. I'm hearing that it's a month, move it back a month so that we can have additional month. That's what I'm hearing. So I just needed some clarification.
That is correct.
And I do support that from listening to the council people that I've talked to, listening to the residents that I've talked to, where they actually need more time.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rubenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to be candid and plead guilty. I'm the one that suggested that we move the matter back to the point where the budget is submitted at the State of the City message for many of the reasons that Councilman Kennedy mentioned, and the additional reason that in gathering the speech, which is basically a rah-rah speech, the mayor will tend to look at facts and figures, which will fall right into the preparation of a budget. And I also suggested that the public hearings be expanded from one to two. I think it's a very good idea that Attorney Mednick has proposed, and I find myself in agreement with it, and I think there is a consensus.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein. Commissioner Gallon Clark, do you still have your hand raised or? Okay, just didn't want to make sure I'm not skipping you. Anyone else that has any comments on this, or do we have a consensus that we'd like to move this up? Great, okay. Steve?
So we move on, and we'll see that when the mayor makes that submission, it will be the general fund budget, which is A1, the capital budget, and a budget message. So the mayor would make a budget message. Presumably, it would be included in the current message that he or she makes under the charter as it speaks today. I had a comment here. Should there be required comments in the budget address? My view on it is there are required provisions in the budget. And if the mayor wants to sell the budget, the mayor is going to give a budget address. The mayor will presumably cover the salient points that will be in the written documents that you receive. So I don't know. I'll leave it to you if you feel that there should be some required things the mayor should cover in that address. They're already going to be in the budget. My judgment was that I raised the question, and I would say that you probably don't need to do anything more, but if people feel strongly about that, I could really develop language for that. So C are the current contents required of the budget without any change. I made no changes here, and I'm hoping that you all looked at some of the other provisions from around the state, which were ad nauseum listed in the report that I gave you to give you a sense of what other communities look for in their budget. And this goes to the vice chair's comments on having a consistent content in the budget. The mayor has to comply with the charter. I'm not sure we want to force a format and put a graphic format in the charter, but at least the content needs to be consistent because GFOA organizations are constantly coming up with better format approaches and display approaches for the budget, but the real key is to have a uniform content. But in the right, under in the caption on the right, S11, I do make some suggestions as to things that you might want to think about putting into the budget, into some of these line items. For example, comparative data on the, and I believe Commissioner Kennedy referred to this before, but actually I would expand on it to comport with his idea, but to look at expenditures and revenues for the proposed current and prior completed fiscal years. So you have hard data as well as projected data to look at in the budget. I also think that there should be a statement of assumptions. This would probably be more true on the revenue side, so that when the mayor is placing revenue items into the budget, particularly items that may come from the General Assembly or even federal, prospective federal funding, our budget year doesn't necessarily correspond certainly with the federal fiscal year. And so there may be assumptions based on a proclamation by the president, but inaction by the Congress. The mayor may make certain assumptions, and those assumptions should be explained in the budget. They're not usually explained in budgets. And I think that there should be either in the mayor's statement or in the budget itself, a requirement to lay out the assumptions of revenue items in general. The next item are the special revenues. And I'll take a look at that definition. And I think that would cover what Commissioner Kennedy talked about and Commissioner Medina talked about a few moments ago, but see if I can come up with a broader definition to make sure those are captured. I see Commissioner Kennedy has a question.
I appreciate the broader definition, but my past dealings with the Hartford Police Department lead me to believe that in terms of, you have the broader definition, but let's be very specific about the drug recoveries or police recoveries of criminal activities. Those dollars, I think that needs to be specifically stated in the charter. Otherwise, they really won't do it.
So including but not limited to, and put specific ones that we want to target to make sure we don't constrict ourselves. All right.
Correct.
Got it. Commissioner Medina. hand up. Do you mind, Mr. Chairman, if I see them?
Go for it, Steve.
Okay.
I agree with Commissioner Kennedy on specifics. I think an additional area of clarity too is agencies that are, and I don't know if this goes in the statement of assumptions or in special revenues, but there are often agencies that are applying for grants, and at the point of a budget, they may not know whether they're getting that funding, but there are applications in place, and the council doesn't find out until approval or until the agency actually receives those dollars and intends to purchase something. So like a clear example would be the Hartford Police Department secured federal grant funding to purchase drones, and the council only found about it after they had received the grant for it. And that would, to me, be some, I'd like to see something that requires any agency that is in the process of applying for a grant or intends to either include that in potential revenue or statement of assumptions for what
So proposed, so they would have to delineate the proposed grants for the fiscal year.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you something. Commissioner Gale or Commissioner Kennedy or others who have served on the council, do you have to sign off on grant applications?
No.
We have to sign off on approval of, yes, we do. We have to sign off on approval of grants. We get a resolution from administration asking council to approve acceptance of a grant from the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving or from the Department of Justice. We get many from the police.
But that's all after the fact.
No, that's my question. Yeah.
Wait, let me just finish.
All right, commissioners, one at a time, please. Commissioner Gale has been recognized. We'll let him finish, and then Commissioner Kennedy, we will go to you.
That, Commissioner Kennedy, I'll wait to hear what you have to say. You may feel it's after the fact, but it is a resolution of council, and if council decided to say no, then my understanding is that the administration could not accept the money. Now, perhaps you want to know that they're even applying for it. That's a different story. But in terms of accepting the money, I do believe that council can actually refuse to accept the money, and the city would not then accept the money.
Commissioner Kennedy.
My experience, that is after the fact. I think I did 14 plus years. I don't think we ever said no. It was money that was all done after the fact. The agency had made the application, applied. In many instances, we didn't even know they were seeking those dollars. The first time we ever get any idea of what was occurring would be the committee meeting, or the council meeting when the item would be referred to committee. So, no, in my opinion, it was almost. It's almost like the budget. It's almost like the approval of bargaining unit agreements. We get them after they've already been negotiated and done, and we either approve them or, the world falls in, quote unquote. So if that process can be improved, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I didn't mean to start a firestorm here. I was just asking a question because I think Commissioner Medina actually raised a good point by at least laying out what those proposed special funds look like going forward. And I was asking a simple question to see how that was done in Hartford. Different cities do it differently. Some communities do it up front, required by ordinance, or I'm not sure there's any charters that I'm aware of, but at least by ordinance that you have to submit grant applications for approval so that you're not wasting a lot of time. If the council is not interested in supporting it, why put a lot of administrative time into a grant to only have it rejected when it comes in? And by doing it up front, unless something changes, you don't have to go back to the council. You probably have to report to the council that the grant's been approved, but the council is a partner at the outset. But I'm not sure that's a charter issue. So except for the possible disclosure that applications are out.
Okay, are there any other questions on this grant issue or comments? Commissioner Gowan Clark.
She never took her hand down.
No, this is a new hand.
Oh, okay.
This is a new hand.
Okay.
And through you, Chair, I would like to go back to ask clarification from Attorney Mednick regarding the budget message. That's where I put my hand up.
Oh,
Does that budget message from what you have here also include the budgeting by priorities and the best practices that you sent to us, the GFOAP, which where the residents start understanding the process even more so because the mayor is actually explaining the overall process and how those priorities were established. Does that also include that?
well, that would be more, if you go right back to the beginning of my document, to section 1A, the budget system. That paragraph is the GFOA public disclosure to let the public know this is what the process means, this is how the process works. And what you'll see throughout this document is a process that's designed to facilitate your participation throughout the entire duration. The mayor's budget statement message, which he'll be giving in conjunction with the state of the city, is basically the statement on what the budget entails. It would behoove the mayor, I think, to say it, use words that members of the public will understand and address the members of the public in that presentation, but that was not intended to pick up on the GFOA document.
Okay.
But thank you for reading them.
Just a follow-up. Oh, absolutely. Just a follow-up question. My understanding is that the current process is where they look at the preceding year or the preceding years. This, from my understanding, instead of looking at the preceding years, you look at the priorities and base your budgeting based upon those priorities. That's the understanding that I received.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you take a look, a few in the caption that we are looking at right now, if you go down to the bottom one, is compliance with the objectives and plan of conservation and development required by the statutes, which goes to the issue of priorities in the community. But we could put a listing in here in the budget to make sure that the priorities are laid out. What are the priorities? And how does this budget meet those priorities? But that's one of the reasons I threw the conservation plan in, because that's a statutory requirement. And I think it's one of those documents that everybody worries about and frets about when it comes before the legislative body, and then many people forget about it. And I, in one of my budget processes, I actually brought it up and suggested that we have it in as a standard that the mayor needs to measure the budget against. How are you achieving this? If the statutes require it and it's meaningful, then it should be part of the explanation of the budget. And
absolutely. And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I interact with a lot of residents. And if we truly want residents to be informed about this process, that helps by understanding the priorities and how the budget actually coincides with these priorities, that whole process. So thank you.
Are the Vice Chair and Commissioner Medina have their hands up? Or they?
Some raised hands, yep.
All right.
Sorry,
Medina?
I'll defer to Commissioner DeJesus Jr. because I know I already spoke and he was waiting, so I can go after him.
So for the signature question about the budget, I'm not sure if my colleague remembers, we had issues with this because some of these grants tie up the hands of some of these collective bargaining agreements. And also the sad part was it restrained us to have minimum employees. For example, I think it was like fire. We had to wait before we collected this money. We had to have a minimum of firemen that were hired at this point. And at that point, we were having pension issues. So let me just make it simpler. Some of these grants should be presented to council so that they can be projected as to what is going to be the cost of acquiring these new employees, because some of them they'll pay for the first 5 years, and then after those 5 years we're on the hook. And so I think yes, some of these grants that are especially federal grants do carry a minimum employee requirement. So for example, the fire department has to have 400 people. The public works has to have a limit of 350 people. And if not, then halfway through that grant, we can lose that grant and then be on the hook for it. So whatever savings we were going to do or save is no longer there. So I do believe that having some previous knowledge to council about what the potential is for these grants is important, but also for council to have a little bit of say or have a conversation as to grants that could be a benefit to the city that the administration may not have in their radar.
Thank you. Commissioner Medina, I think, has his hand up.
Yeah, just to provide some clarity on I think an issue that Commissioner Kennedy was, I think, rightfully raising on the issue of grants. That part of the problem, and I think this speaks also to Commissioner DeJesus' comments, where you have, for example, the Justice Bryan grant can be used for community-oriented policing, which would be personnel hire. That there's likely some personnel costs that the city's taking on for that additional hire that the grant may not fully cover. And I think that clarity for the public is incredibly important. But separate from that, there are grants, and also I should mention in-kind gifts from the federal government, like old military equipment that, for example, the police department can receive, that should be stated, not just the dollar amount and the figure, but what the grant is for or intended to be for, I think is key. Because, for example, it caught many people by surprise that the city of Hartford ended up building a surveillance center with largely federal funding or state funding. And at the time, a talking point of the police department was like, well, there's no city taxpayer dollars that we're using. The issue wasn't where the tax money came from. The issue is that no one knew this was happening. It wasn't a stated principle until the center opened, and then they announced, like, this is a great thing that we have. So I think on an annual basis, requiring that any agency, not just to pick on police, but any agency that is applying for a grant in the statement assumptions or special revenues has to have a narrative description of the intention of the grant and what it's being used for.
Yeah.
It gives council clarity, not just on what the total dollar amounts the agency is using, but what they intend to use it for. Because I agree with what was stated, that sure, the council signs off, but in my experience, it has always been, that's after the application, after a federal grant has been approved, the dollar's sitting waiting there, and then the council is voting to receive it. But that's also the first time the council is likely, or it's certainly true for the minority party, when you're first hearing that this is something that's even on the table to begin with.
So it's the concept of the gross budget. I went through this in New Haven many years ago and started really expanding aldermanic jurisdiction over applications, any application. And so, so the police department can't come in and surprise you with a grant. They would have to come to you up front for permission to apply for the grant. If somebody wants to gift the city something, it's still something would have to be approved, because no department of the city, including the mayor, has the ability to amend the budget and to modify the budget. And so the idea is to have a broader definition to make sure that the gross budget includes some of those items. So the next item that I've included here is an item that I've recently addressed. I've addressed it over the years, but never brought it into the charter. It was in the Hamden Charter, which the council killed a few weeks ago. And that is the mayor needs to designate or explain the amounts that are the budget figures that are driven by contractual provisions of collective bargaining agreements. And principally, the two major components of that would be in the police and fire CBAs with overtime. Because the real question is how much of the overtime is driven by actual service and how much is it driven by contractual provisions that require minimum personnel requirements. And so an explanation of those figures and comparative data on those figures will show you that a lot of the overtime is relatively consistent. And if it was service driven, it would not be consistent. And so an explanation of that and how that works might help the council play a greater role in encouraging the mayor to look at modification of collective bargaining agreements. And that's the reason for that provision that I recommend that goes into the would go into the budget comment, the budget content.
Excellent suggestion.
Yep. Oh, good. Thank you.
Commissioner DeJesus has his hand
Then
up.
I've already talked about the plan of conservation, that there needs to be a statement of compliance. I'm sorry, is there a question?
Commissioner DeJesus has his hand
Oh,
up.
I see. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. And also for the projections, one of the underlying issues for potential future revenues that is not being projected, Commissioner Kennedy brought up about future projections, and I think you seconded it, is the tax abatements that the city gives out to certain subsidized properties. So there is no general list of all these properties that are coming up due for these tax abatements. And they do have an implication when they're usually the way it comes to council is the company or the owner or the agency who's operating these tax abated properties brings it to the city, and then they do a quick agreement and then brings it to the council. And so there should be a heads up, and there should be a general list or a general consensus by the administration as to how many tax abatements are there out in the city. This is not to be confused with churches, government buildings, federal buildings, not to be confused with those tax abatements. Those are just by state law, but the ones that the council has a discretion to approve. And that usually does not come with a number as to the implication that it may have in the next 20 to 30 years. And we're really reactive in that. And I think that has a huge impact in our budget, but it has been overlooked for many years. And I've asked for years, even my 4 years on council, for the administration to generate a list of what is our potential losses, what are our losses, what can we do to recover some of those losses. And there's no list. We don't know until an owner of these property or management company comes over and asks for an extension on their tax abated property.
Got it. Everybody comfortable with that?
Absolutely.
All right. So are there any other suggestions on the contents of the proposed budget? I think I have a sense there were 4 or 5. I'll go over them. One's kind of disclosure of upcoming fiscal year grants for the fiscal year, so that you know up front what they may be. The special funds expansion to deal with the recovery funds and the line grants. I'll take a look. I'll talk to Commissioner Medina about that offline. The priority statement, I will try to include that within 2 sections. One, in the introduction of the whole chapter, and secondly, in the compliance with the objectives of the plan of conservation, to make sure that the mayor lays out how the budget addresses the priorities for the public. So those are the 4 pickups that I get from the conversation. Did I miss anything in that?
No.
All right, good. So now the harder part is the next section D, and I highlighted the language or a separate report attached here too. I'm assuming that we want to make sure that it's clear that the budget includes both the general fund and capital, and we don't want to give an out to delay the capital budget. I don't know if that's been a problem in Hartford. It's been a problem in other communities, and if a mayor can avoid proposing the capital budget, they do. So would you support deletion of the separate report language that's in the current charter and make sure that it's part of the budget message?
I agree.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Right, just to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then I laid out some different standards well, mainly from Stanford, but there are others that I will use as well, that the detailed estimates, what needs to be included in there, detailed estimates of project costs, offsetting reimbursements, what kind of reimbursements are we expecting in the capital side. In the current charter, I believe 31 is a current requirement, actually, that the mayor has to delineate the method of financing the capital projects, and then comparisons with other fiscal year capital appropriations. I believe that, yeah, this is a 4 fiscal year standard in Hartford. And the status on previously adopted capital projects, including completion dates and remaining balance, and then any other information that would be deemed pertinent by the mayor. Those are kind of the broad categories. Does anybody have any other thoughts on something else you'd like to see based on your experience in a capital budget? All right. So I'll draft some language there. The appropriation ordinance, neither of the above ordinances. Well, that's more of a question about where that section will go. So I think we're done with that section. The next section I described briefly earlier was the public hearing process. 5A1 is basically language that's in the charter right now, so that if the budget is submitted at the mayor's state of the city, so it'd be early in March, your first public hearing would be within not less than 7 days, no more than 10 days after the submission. So that would be early in the process. Is everybody okay with that time frame for the first public hearing?
Yes.
Right. The word published is in here, and at some point we should talk about what published means, unless there's a state statute that requires newspaper publication. But when we get to definitions, we'll probably address that issue. The final public hearing, does anybody have any thoughts on, we have a couple of communities that have had 2 public hearings. Waterbury, second hearing is not more than 7 days, nor fewer than 3 prior to adoption is a standard that they have in Waterbury. In Middletown, there is no second public hearing in Middletown, I'm sorry. I think that's let's see, Waterbury and, New Haven has 7 days prior to the first reading. Do you know what a first reading means?
Yes.
Others may not.
Educate folks, yeah.
Yeah, in New Haven, and I don't know how you do it in Hartford, but in New Haven, when something is submitted to the Board of Alders, they get a first reading upon its submission, and then they would at the next meeting have a second reading of the committee meeting in between. It doesn't really apply to Hartford, so I think you should probably think about some kind of time frame before final action would be my recommendation. And the water
about a week.
Bruce, give them some flexibility. So it's just if you say 7 days, it's got to be 7 days. Give them 10 to 7 days before the actual scheduled budget adoption, before the budget adoption meeting. And they generally have an idea when that is, and that should give them sufficient flexibility to make sure there's a public hearing on a convenient time for everyone. And then the council has a week to process what they've heard.
All right.
Good idea.
Commissioner
10 days
has a suggestion as well.
I want to go back to, and thank you, Chair. And through you, I'd like to ask this question of Councilman Gale, because I heard loud and clear from 2 council members who were on probably month before last that they didn't have sufficient time. So I need to know, Councilman Gale, with the initial public hearing, the way that it's written, is that sufficient time? before you're answering questions to the public, is that sufficient time for you all to digest the budget and go through it with a fine-tooth comb? Again, I have to go back to what Councilman Clark talked about and what Councilwoman Surgeon talked about.
So, Commissioner, in my experience, and you're asking about the first public hearing.
Yes.
In my experience, the first public hearing that we have, the only public hearing that we have, really is not a very specific public hearing in terms of, we don't get the public coming up saying, you know, I'm upset that there's $100,000 in this department's budget. What really happens at those public hearings is people come forward and talk about what their priorities are for the city of Hartford. And it's fascinating to me, and I keep pretty good notes of all these public hearings. And many years we've had them at Buckley High when they were live. And, you know, people show up and we have microphones. Some nights we have as few as 10 or 12 people speaking. Some nights we have had 30 people. And some nights, maybe half of them are there talking about education, something that the council almost has very little authority over because of the guaranteed budgets, we have to send the same amount of money over to the board. We can't really tell them how to spend it. But that's what comes through loud and clear is that particular year, that's what was on the public's mind. They were very concerned about education. So I would have to say to you that usually what the feedback I get from the public is very helpful, because it's telling me what the public's pulse is in terms of issues that are of concern to them. They'll come up and they'll talk about, you know, hey, the streets are full of garbage. This solid waste pickup isn't working. And, you know, so they're clearly saying, you know, they want something done with DPW, or as I mentioned, education, or, you know, I'm just picking examples, but that's kind of my experience for that first public hearing. I don't know, you know, it would be kind of interesting if we had a second public hearing to see if at the second public hearing you would get more specific comments at that point in time. What I think would be really interesting, having listened to all this, is the way we do the budget is to have each department come forward and present their budget, and then council gets to question. And most recently, for the last 4 or 5 years, we've done this over a series of 5 or 6 nights. Some of those nights we've started at 5:30 and we've gone till midnight. And, you know, we'll have police in there for 3 hours talking about their budget. Now that's all publicized. That's all out there on cable access, and now it's on Facebook and YouTube. So it would be interesting to have a public hearing after the public has had an opportunity to watch what we've watched. So here we are, council, we've watched, you know, 7 nights of hearings and listened to all these department heads. I think it might be kind of fun as a council, interesting, forget fun, I mean, interesting and educational as a council member to see what the public's takeaway is from all those budget presentations. And maybe then we might get something that was a little bit more specific, where you know, a public member of the public might come forward and say, you know, I heard about the recreation budget and that you only have 3 employees, and I really think that, you know, what are we doing with that? You know, as an example, and say, let's put some more money in that, and that could be meaningful for council members.
Thank you.
Long answer.
What do folks think about moving that first public hearing back to after we've heard from, or council has heard from department heads, fleshing things out? What do folks think about that?
I wouldn't move the first one back, because we're not hearing from department heads until, I mean, after we hear from department heads, we kind of go and adopt the budget a week later.
Okay.
So that's, hearing from department heads is not early in the process, it's pretty late in the process. I mean, we could change that around, but right now, hearing from department heads comes the first week in May, second week in May, when we're adopting the budget the third week in May.
So the 7 to 10 day prior to the adoption meeting would cover, presumably cover that, so that the public hearing would take place after those, after the due diligence is complete prior to final action.
Sure, I might even say 3 to 10 days. Give yourself even a larger window.
Good. Everybody okay with that?
Yes, we're okay with it.
Yeah, in fact, that's the standard. That's the standard in Waterbury. It's 3 to 7, so 3 to 10 works well. All right. Okay, so the next section is, we thought there might be a lot of discussion on this. Maybe there still will be. There's a note from the chair, because this issue had come up. I think the Majority Leader Clark raised the issue of what he called the line item veto authority for the council. And I did talk to the Majority Leader this morning because I was concerned about his statement, and I was looking through the charter, particularly after I broke it down the way I did. It looks like the council already has the ability to effectuate lines. If you take a look at 5B 1A and B, the council has the ability to insert new items of expenditure. I think an item means a line item of expenditure, or to increase, decrease, or strike out items of expenditure. So, I mean, I defer to Councilman Gale or former Councilman Kennedy to see if I've misread that, but it looks to me like the council already has pretty broad ability to affect the lines of the budget.
Well, I can't speak for the prior administration. I can speak for the current administration. We, I've been involved in the last 6 budgets, and in each case, changes that we've made have been line item changes. And when the mayor has accepted or rejected them, it's been on the basis of the specific line item. So we will have specifically said we're deducting X amount of dollars from, a subset of the police budget, a particular line, and adding it to some other line. But that's our recent experience.
If I may, in the past, what we were told was, we did make cuts by budget line in the budget detail. However, we were basically approving them when we had the adoption process, a general number for the overall budget of each department. And that was my understanding of how we conducted the budget. Now that may have changed, I don't know, but that was the process that we had. We made individual cuts line by line, but the adoption, the budget, the ordinance is adopted for the budget is each department is given a general total number, and therefore they have a lot of flexibility within that number.
Why would that be the case if you do a line item budget?
That's good question. I don't know the answer to it. That was just my experience. We made line item cuts in the budget detail. I see Raul, he's anxious to say something. So I'll let him get in. He's chopping at the bit. Go ahead.
Listen, I am forever happy that I had another attorney read that same sentence the way you did. So we had about 2 or 3 corporation councils, and they both read that to say that we did not have a line item veto. So if there's any way to make that any clearer, I think that would be great. But yes, we've gotten opinions, and I read that, and that's my first legal question that I asked to Corporation Counsel, if we had line item veto. And time after time, and I'll be honest, I shopped around every time we got a new Corporation Counsel, and this is FOIable. I asked that Corporation Counsel, they concluded that we did not have line item veto. And so I think if there's any way to make that sentence a little clearer, that'll be best.
Were there written opinions, Mr. Vice Chair, on that?
They would never give us nothing in writing. It was that, the Corporation Council's word is final. And so, and I think that needs to be addressed later on, that there should be some paper trail.
I'm a former corporation counsel, and I wish people showed me that much respect when I was corporation counsel. I was always dispute. No, I'm just joking. So there is no written opinion stating that.
There may be an email or two where they're responding to me, but I think that's the extent of those. We probably had like 3 formal legal opinions, and that was from some, I think maybe for the Register of Voters situation and some other situations. But outside of that, there were not many legal opinions written out of Corporation Counsel when we asked.
Mr. Chairman,
Other charters, I'll defer to Commissioner Gale. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Rubenstein, we're going to go to Councilman Gale, and then we will come to you.
Mr. Chair, I don't know, do I have the ability to share the screen?
You may be testing my the limits of my abilities here. Hold on. It looks like you can share your screen.
Let me see if I can do that. I would love to just show everyone what the existing, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, frankly, because on my iPad, I don't know how to share this here. Give me just 2 seconds to try to play with this. And that doesn't work.
No, it's there.
All right. Well, I don't know to what extent all commissioners have had an opportunity to look at the existing budget of the city of Hartford. I think we talked about it right from the get-go, but it's online. You can get it. You got to go to the finance department and you can find a copy of the adopted budget. And if you look at the adopted budget for the city of Hartford, it's this year it's a 331-page document, and the last section of it includes in great detail the exact resolutions that were passed by council. And I'm looking at financial resolution DEMS number 2. This was passed by council May 20th of 2021. And this has got 6 very specific line item decreases. The budget is amended to reflect a decrease of $200,000 in benefits and insurances, line 00820, and then it goes on. So just by way of example, at least the current administration has certainly not taken the position that council does not have the ability to decrease and increase by line item. It's right there in the budget. It's part of the adopted budget book, because the adopted budget includes 3 specific pieces. It includes the budget as it's submitted. It includes all the changes that council made, and then it includes the tax levy appropriation. So I encourage all commissioners to take a look at that. Much of what we're talking about tonight is certainly expressed in that budget in tremendous detail. I know we heard earlier some comments about seeing past projections and forward projections. You'll see in that budget there's 5 years of projections at all times for just about everything. It goes back 3 years and it goes forward 1 year on just about everything. But anyway, I've talked. Thank you.
So to answer the question somebody raised earlier about clarity, if you take a look at footnote number 41, I showed you that New Haven and New Britain actually has a line that says individual lines of appropriation, and Waterbury and Bridgeport, and I know they both have line item, call it any item, which is similar to the language we have in the Hartford Charter. I think it's clear, that's why I was asking whether there was an opinion, that the line item authority exists, and I think Councilman Gale just underscored that point. But if you want to belt and suspender it, you could always throw in individual lines or something like that to make it absolutely clear that would be the case.
I love belt and suspenders.
Right.
Steve, it's my understanding that the only formal opinion that Corp Council has on file is with regards to the mayor's veto power, but there's no formal outline of the council's ability to make adjustments to the mayor's budget. So
the opinion on Yeah, I think that's right, Mr. Chairman. I think in the opinion on the mayor's veto was my opinion, I think, that was rendered a number of years ago on behalf of the council. Okay, that takes us through that issue. The subsection C talks about adoption of the budget, and I guess the issue here is the date for adoption. Right now, it's no later than date specified by ordinance, but at least 1 month, so June 1st, before the end of the current fiscal year. And again, footnote number 45 lays out a number of the dates that many communities have. And again, these dates historically were driven by the need for time to formulate the tax bill. I think the chair has some pertinent information on that subject for Hartford. So I'll defer to the chair.
Yes, I spoke to the assessor and the tax collector. And once council passes the final budget, and if the mayor doesn't have any objections, the mill rate goes to the assessor. The assessor takes some time to plug those numbers in and then forwards that information over to the tax collector. And then the tax collector has to put together the bills and start issuing them and so on and so forth to get the next year's tax bill out. And they suggested to me that pushing back the date of the budget adoption significantly would kind of impede their abilities to do their job and stretch their staff. We are moving the date at which the council gets the actual budget forward significantly. So I just wanted to flag that conversation for you all as we consider this, so everyone knows where the folks that are kind of doing this work stand on this. They'd kind of like to remain status quo. Any other opinions as to whether we should push it out further or whether it should remain the same?
I'm sorry, I just had trouble getting to my video screen. Is there any way to make it? I mean, yeah, I actually have a different viewpoint on that. And I always appreciate how people, if you ask me for changes in my job, my occupation, I probably wouldn't be happy about it. I keep thinking, second Monday in June. It still gives folks, I think, at least 2 weeks more to get it done. Sometimes the second Monday is very early, depending on when the first Monday falls.
So is the second Monday, when we're talking about the final date, because there's some, in fact, I wrote a note here that this was confusing. The question is, with that final date, is that the date after which the mayor has either vetoed or approved the budget? And the council then has the ability to override, because that's really the final date, arguably. If there is a veto, there is a time frame after the veto in which the council gets to vote. And there are some charters that create traps. If the council doesn't have the ability to meet within that date, the mayor's budget becomes the budget. Mayors very often push their vetoes off. So.
Well, council meets on the second Monday of the month, so I mean that's helpful.
That would be final action on the budget would be no later than the second Monday of June.
Correct. I mean, you probably have to pass the budget sometime before that.
That's correct.
And then again, the mayor would have it completed either
you'd have
vetoes or overrides by then.
So you'd have to work back to where they take their final legislative action, and you have this second Monday in June. It doesn't quite achieve what we were trying to achieve, because you wanted to have a situation where you knew where all the state revenues were coming from, if in the long session.
Depends on the session, but yeah, I mean, I'm understanding what James is talking about. I mean, you'd like to push it back further, but maybe that's just the best compromise you can come up with at this point in time.
All right. Is everybody comfortable with that second Monday? That is the final action. which means that the final legislative action before mayoral approval or not would be prior to that time. And then we'd have to work the time frame in for the mayor's, how much time does the mayor get to consider for a veto? And then the override would have to occur on the second Monday, by the second Monday in June. The override or to override.
Commissioner
Mr.
Rubin.
Chairman?
Yeah.
Thank you. The present budget is roughly, the last one, a little over 300 pages. What we've done probably, or what we'll be doing, will make it bigger. The mayor had, I think, 2 days with respect to veto, and that seems to be unfair. So I probably would give a mayor somewhere between 7 and 10 days. From my point of view, that would be a fair time frame to look at the work that the council did and react.
Okay, thank you for that. Can we just go back to before we cover that, can we go back to the previous conversation on the final action?
Yeah, that seems like a good date.
What is I guess the question is, what is the latest that the second Monday in June is? Because I'm looking at, would be June in 2021, that would have been June 14th, because there was the first Monday in June is the 7th. So that might be challenging.
Question for the chair, just for clarity.
Yeah.
For former council members and current council members, what are we talking about in terms of overriding a veto, like it actually happening? Is question one, and then question two: are there any powers that the council has to call a special meeting to deal with something like a unique situation where they have to override a mayor's veto? I asked that question just to figure out, placing this in the reality, the likelihood that this would happen. Are there other mechanisms that the council has to override a veto within their power, calling a special meeting, and therefore maybe we don't have to hold ourselves so strictly to this issue?
Yes, council can call a special meeting. Can be done I believe one of two ways. I thought let me see, if memory serves, it's 3 council members can get together to call to advocate for a special meeting, or I believe the council president can call one on their own initiative. With respect to, so I mean, there is, so with Commissioner, with respect to your question, yes, council can always call a special meeting, a couple different ways, and as long as the service is done appropriately. With respect to the June 15th date, the second Monday of the month is usually going to be, for next year, it's June 13th. So this year being the 14th or the 15th, I think that's about as far as it's going to go. I don't think it could be much beyond that. I'm not a calendar person, but I would just think that having a date for the second Monday beyond the 15th would be really rare. And that's pretty deep into June, to be quite honest. But I think second Monday would probably get it covered, and it's the same day as a council meeting. So that, that might be of some benefit.
And keep in mind that is the final action, which means in all likelihood, because I know that the chair talked to people today, the greater likelihood is that this will be done by the end of May to give time for the mayor, whether we go with Bruce's number or not. You probably want to go with more than 2 days, but all those things would have to be lined up so that the final action could take place by that second Monday in June. But that is only if there's a veto.
Right.
If the budget's approved, then the budget's approved back at the end of May. I'll work the dates out, but so we have the dead date of final action. They're likely in most years you're not going to have a veto. I don't know when the last time the mayor vetoed a budget in Hartford. So it's not likely that you would be there. It would be an extraordinary year, unless one of the council members wants to correct me on that.
No, the current mayor has vetoed our changes almost every year.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, but we've come up with, there may have been 15 changes and he vetoed 7 of them, or, he vetoed 3. But yes, we've had this discussion every year.
Oh, so it's a regular, okay.
It's a regular occurrence. Line up, people say, all of a sudden they want to take, $1 million out of a line item, and the mayor says, no, I'm vetoing it. And then the question is whether we can put together the votes and to override it and have a special meeting.
All right.
I think that's no different than either Pedro or Eddie. They both veto budgets.
Okay, so are we agreed on that second Tuesday, or are you concerned about it, Mr. Chairman, based on your
Second Monday.
second Monday? I'm sorry, second Monday. Apologies. Second Monday.
I'm still a little concerned. Why don't we keep it in there for now, and we'll workshop it to various stakeholders and come back and have a discussion about it at our next meeting.
Yeah, and at some point, Mr. Chair, I would strongly recommend that we share when I go through the next draft. You'll decide whether I do it simultaneously with transmittal to you guys. At some point, we may want to show this to the finance people, have them look at what we're doing as well in this process. So the next issue is an issue that I didn't know much about, Section 6. And this is the work program and allotments. I asked several people, and maybe Councilman Gale will know the answer to this. I think I now know it. It's a term that is used in different municipalities. There are several municipalities that have these allotments. When I called the finance director today and we chatted about it, she indicated when she came here, she was trying to figure out what it meant and why do we do it. And she was told because it's in the charter. Because it sounds almost like an alternate process for almost transfers. And so I've asked them to take a deeper look at the allotments, how they do it. And basically what they do, as she told me today, was they take the budget, they divide all the lines in the budget by 12. And that's how they come up with the allotment, a monthly allotment for each of the departments. But if you read the language, it looks like the mayor has the approval to limitations, to revise the allotments. And it was just unclear to me how that would be done without a budget amendment or without a transfer. So I'm trying to get an understanding of how the allotments work, number one, and whether or not they're necessary at all in an era where you have computer technology that basically will allow us to track whatever the administration is doing. And I will talk to some other finance people to try to get a sense of it. But it was a section that didn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, the language is clear, but I still wasn't sure what the intent was when you go through it. And I don't know whether any of the council members have addressed this issue in any way, shape, or form.
I can say that I have not addressed this specifically. However, I would note that in looking at Section 6, Item 3, it does very specifically indicate that the mayor shall ascertain whether revenue will be less than appropriations and consider work programs and allotments and revise the allotments to forestall incurring a deficit. And I know that as we got close to bankruptcy several years ago, it was very much a concern where we were looking at exactly when did we get the educational sharing fund money. So now we were looking specifically at, well, was this money coming in on September 1 or was it coming in on October 1 because you had certain monies that you then were spending. So I mean, those kind of budgetary things have to happen if you get to a point. We don't want to ever be in a point like that again. But if you get to a point like that, you are going to then be deciding, well, who's not getting paid and who is getting paid. And it sounds to me like that's what this is all about. But it also sounds to me like it's a section that is not terribly used except in a very dire circumstance.
What I was thinking also, if you take a look, and I don't have any comments on your transfer section, but after I talked to the finance director to get a better sense of this, it sounds to me that some of this can be dealt with in the transfer provisions. There are, I have written provisions that give the mayor's discretion within department lines to be able to make some internal transfers within a department. But when you start moving from one department to another, you probably want to involve the legislative body. So, all right. So I just wanted to alert you that I have, I've asked, I put an SOS out to the finance director, and we're going to have a chat about the allotments, hopefully in the next, in very, very soon.
Hey, Steve, before we move on, can we go back to Commissioner Rubenstein's comment regarding how much time the mayor—
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
The veto. So Commissioner Rubenstein, you were saying 7 to 10 days. Is that right? That's what.
Yeah, 7 to 10 days, I think, would be fair. The budget's going to be over 300 pages.
Are there any other thoughts on that?
Well, to earlier points, you know, people have said consistently that the administration has far more knowledge of the budget than council, which I think is absolutely true. The administration has put the budget together. And when council comes up with their changes, they're relatively few in my experience, and they're very pointed. And in my experience, the mayor knew whether he was going to veto something pretty much within 5 minutes after we took it to him, because they put that number together to begin with. I mean, I'm not opposed to giving the mayor some longer period of time, but there is some something to be said for, you know, let's move the process along. We've gone through a lot of deliberation. We've come up, you know, we threw this on the table, and then, you know, the mayor knows what he's going to do. She knows what she's going to do. Just come out with it. So 7 to 10 days seems a lot. 2 days, maybe it's too little, but it certainly hasn't hampered prior mayors in my experience.
I second that statement. I agree with Councilman Gale.
What do folks feel about, first of all, there's the preliminary question of there's no definition of what a day is in the charter currently, and there's an issue there that Corp Council has asked us to address. And so if we're thinking it's going to be business days, is 5 days, does that work for folks? Commissioner Rubenstein, is that all right?
That's fine. That's fine.
I would, sorry, that's what the chair, this is Nolan. I just have I agree with Commissioner Gale. I mean, this is a document that the mayor puts together. His office knows it fairly intimately, and the revisions that are made to it are line item revisions of total dollar amounts that doesn't take a significant amount of time. So I just think 3 business days and making it clear that we're talking about business days is enough. And I just have a hard time believing that more than 3 business days is needed.
So you want business days. Normally when I define days, it's calendar days, and you'd have to specify business. So for this purpose, we want to use business days.
I'm good with business days. I think that makes sense.
Very good. Is everybody okay with 3?
Yeah, do the 3.
All right.
Okay.
Good. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, and sorry, Commissioner Rubenstein. I didn't mean to jump over that. I apologize.
No problem.
So the last sections that we need to discuss are in E and F near the, well, there's actually a final one as well. Monthly and other periodic reports. I believe that Commissioner Gale, I know, provided us with some information on various reports, and Commissioner Vice Chair DeJesus raised some questions about the need for periodic reports. And so why don't we address that issue first and see what people want to do about reports. I added one that the finance director currently does a monthly report under the charter. It's not under the budget section, it's under the finance director section itself. And so the question I have is, and then we also have the OMB reports that are overtime and overage reports, and then again, an annual report on assisted projects. Is there anything else that you'd be looking for that is either not in the charter or in the ordinances at this point? Since there is a monthly report requirement, does that cover what you were looking for, those who are supportive of the concept of monthly reports?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Attorney Mednick, does
Yes,
that you've mentioned take into account former Councilman Kennedy's question with respect to property in the Hartford PD that heretofore in the prior years were never given to the council?
No, the section that's in there right now does not include it. It's really a receipts. It's a kind of a ledger book kind of report on how much has come in, how much has gone out. The commissioner, the issue raised by Commissioner Kennedy and Commissioner Medina, I think, was an issue that would be included in the budget proposal. So I suppose that it would be useful if items are in the budget, there should be a report on what changes have been made in the various categories, if that's an important category for you.
Right. Okay.
So includes
Fair enough.
funds, basically.
Fair enough.
Right.
Thank you.
Commissioner DeJesus.
So in this, I would like to see something in the charter that speaks to the monthly report. I think this administration has done it. I think, if it's I think it'll be important to put it in there. What I would like to see though is more budget related, in the sense the projections that they make, to make sure that the projections that they made in revenue, they're being met. And if they're not being met, there should be a message in there as to why it's not being met, and to kind of forecast where the troubles are. So if that federal funding did not come in, why so? Or if it's coming or it's being delayed, or is there any new revenues that's come in? Should be earmarked or somehow be notified as to where we are in projection wise with the budget that we just approved, and how are we are moving forward, so that there could be everyone in unison knowing where we are with the budget, but also an update as to what was approved, and making sure that we are at projection, or we're below projection, or we are in need of resources. So I think there should be something that comes along in the budget that speaks to that, because the ordinance that I passed was okay, but I don't think it has enough teeth to keep it going.
But did you take a look at the footnote 71? The first bullet. That's currently in the charter. That's a monthly financial report.
Correct. And that has changed from time to time as how the language is now. So like if you was to ask Councilman Gale now, or another councilman, some of that has changed depending on the liking of who was in office. But again, would like to see some consistency, so that, I believe in that process of cross-training. So the director is not there, the assistant director can pick it up. If the assistant director is not there, the person right below knows how to work it. And so if you look at there's some variances on these monthly reports from time to time, but there should be some baseline ones that are important to be there and be consistent on.
Anyone else? I'll look at other language, but this kind of is a balance sheet kind of a monthly analysis. So I'll take a look at some other language to see if I can bolster it up a little bit. Because they shouldn't be varying. This is a charter provision. They should be complying with the charter. Well, you know, I get it. But if we put words in where they comply with those words, it's up to the council to make sure they do, I guess, is what it comes down to. Because I don't think this language has been changed since 2002. This was in the revised charter 19 years ago. So I'll take a look at it and see if I can tighten it up, and we'll run it by you at the next meeting.
Fair enough.
And Commissioner DeJesus, if you have examples from your time on the council of what they look like, and we can compare them to what the current mayor is sending to the council now, we can get a sense of what the differences are, and that may be helpful for attorney.
That'd be great.
Right, and as you look at the ordinance that was passed our last council meeting when I was in office, it addressed some of those issues that were not being covered or were not consistent in covering. So this is exactly the same reason why I think we're going to go into that section where it goes online, because there's a tendency of documents not being preserved or kept, and so it makes it that much harder for someone who is picking up the torch to know where's the information that was there 8 years ago.
The sections of the ordinances, I think Councilman Gale gave us 2-94D and E. Were those the ordinances that you adopted, that you proposed, or is there another ordinance that I'm missing?
I sent those about 3 weeks ago.
All right, I'll take a look. You know, you sent something, Mr. Chairman, correct me if I'm wrong, that said the ordinance was attached and it wasn't. Hold on, let me look at it.
And I sent it at the beginning of the budget process too. I think it was the second time we sent it.
Yeah.
We'll have to go back and look at it.
19.
I thought Commissioner DeJesus, and this is my fault, I thought that you were saying that you had drafted the ordinances that Councilman Gale had sent over to us.
That's correct.
That is correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, that addresses some of the shortfalls that the charter did not fulfill.
Okay.
All right, we'll take a look at that. Anybody else have any other thoughts on monthly reports?
Nope.
If not, I'm sorry. Commissioner Rubenstein? All right.
No, I don't have any.
All right, subsection F was the public online access to financial reports and documents. And I think some language can be developed that would assure public access to this information, and I would put it into the opening provisos of the chapter. But maybe Vice Chair DeJesus has some thoughts since he had proposed this notion.
I think it's very straightforward. Right now, it's under executive approval, through executive order as to the budget being publicized online at the data.hartford.gov. I also sent that link in there. And also you can see the budgets from 2012 to 2015. And then you see a gap between 2015 till about last year, I want to say, or the year before. And I think when we talk about the budget being so long and big, the way that data work, this is, I want to say, about 10-year-old technology. I mean, I could just imagine what's out there now. You can hone into exactly what you want. And you can do this on your mobile device. You can do this on your tablet. And it breaks down that 300-page and makes it more digestible for a person who does not do it. It also allows you to do some projections yourself on, that's what we had. And the public can pretty much export that information into Excel spreadsheets. So if they want to do their own analysis on the budget, run their own numbers, they can do that. And I think it is a tremendous tool that I think is starting to get used again. But if you look at the link that I sent over, it's a perfect model and it's real data. And so I think it's something that should be continued. not only that, but it also inconveniences the people if they have to go to the town clerk's office to pick up a budget book, and sometimes not even printed on time. And they may have, so this allows everyone and anyone to go to even to the library to access the budget and, look at it through charts, through pie charts. It kind of is very interactive, very stimulating. And I think that's what the community needs. I know that we're working on the Wi-Fi situation and we're getting more internet into the community, but that is the future. And I think, a lot of people that went to our public hearings, they use that tool and they would cite that they were using it online because that allows them in their lunch break or in their, wherever they are in the world, they can access this. Also, it was great for interns. When we had interns in our office and they were doing school projects, they would give us some feedback. I remember some of my interns there, they would give us some feedback and some analysis, and it allows municipalities from outside or anyone from the outside to kind of understand what our budget looks like. And so it is there, it doesn't cost anything, and it doesn't have business hours. So, town clerk closes at 5, you try to get there, you miss the budget, can't get it, then you can access it online. And so I think there should be a 2-prong. I think the paper should be still allowed, but the online information is tremendous. And I think, again, if you guys have not visited, I spoke to a few guys have gone to the website, data.hartford.gov, or the one that we did was budget.hartford.gov. So check those out and those links. I can resend it, but you'll see how interactive and how much easier it is to digest that $250 million budget.
Commissioner Gallon Clark.
Thank you. I just want to do a general support of what Commissioner DeJesus just talked about. I did look at the website. I was very impressed. It was very interactive, very user-friendly. We definitely need something like that.
So noted. Steve?
The last issue is something we can defer, but I had raised the issue of budget liaison or analyst. It could be deferred to the time where we discuss the council section. I'll leave it up to the chair and the members of the body to see what you want to do.
That's my preference, since it'll probably live in that section. Anyone have any strong disagreements with that? Okay.
No.
Great.
That's it for me. The borrowing section was there, but I've not addressed anything on it at this point. I don't think we received any testimony, so we'll probably defer that to a later date.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments before we hit 9 p.m.? Okay, seeing none, without objection, we will stand adjourned at 8:58 p.m. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate all your hard work.
Good night.